right, so we're nice and cozy. The screen is kind of small, so I just thought I would sit, make it a little more casual as we kind of go through this. So you're here for TOPS LOFSA, so I'm assuming we have high school age, or we're getting close to that. We have ninth grade, 10th, oh, senior. Okay, so we're getting in there. Okay, perfect. Perfect. So you're sort of familiar with the stuff. Okay, great. So that's exactly what we're going to focus on. We're focusing on TOPS, the different award levels from a home study perspective. I am Anna Bro. I'm an outreach coordinator with Louisiana Office of Student Financial Assistance, also known as LOFSA, also known as the TOPS folks. And definitely. My specialty area, I'm the home study liaison for the state. So I work with home study students and parents across the state for TOPS processing. And if you're familiar with us and you may have reached out to our tops.homestudy@la email address, I'm at the other end of that, so we may have met before. So I'm kind of here to help assist. I joke that I'm your concierge, just to kind of help you with all things TOPS, because there are a lot of hats that you wear. As a home study parent, you're doing all of the things all of the time. So if we can help with some of those things, I'm happy to do that. Just a little bit about LOFSA. We also wear a whole bunch of hats. Most people know us for the TOPS scholarship, which is true, but we also facilitate the full state scholarships and grants programs. We also offer comprehensive advising services, where comprehensive advising officers work with students and families for wraparound services, for additional financial aid resources, for degree comparisons, interest surveys, basically kind of helping to pave the road of what comes next after high school. So if we can be of assistance, we're happy to do that. And then on top of all that, we also administer the state's 529 college savings programs as well. So a little bit about TOPS and home study students in particular. Students who complete 11th grade, if applicable, and 12th grade in a BESI-approved home study program are eligible for TOPS, provided they meet the other general eligibility requirements. Now, the 11th grade, if applicable, will always make people go, well, what does that mean? If a student has done home study throughout 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, they've never been enrolled in a BESI-approved public or non-public school, we need that 12th grade BESI approval. Now, at any point in 9th and 10th grade, if the student was enrolled in a BESI-approved public or non-public school, we have to have 11th and 12th grade, because the statute requires that they enroll in a BESI-approved home study program no later than the end of the 10th grade year and complete 11th and 12th. So usually, out of an abundance of caution, you'll hear us say, hey, have the 11th and 12th grade BESI approvals. That's kind of why we say that, but that's kind of the difference of 11th and 12th versus just the 12th. Now, BESI-approved home study students are eligible for TOPS under the alternative eligibility requirements that are listed in RS 175029, and because they fall under alternative eligibility, good morning, come on in, alternative eligibility, the merit-based requirement is a little different for home study students than it is for students who are attending those brick-and-mortar public and non-public schools. Now, the general eligibility requirements are the same for all students. So there is a citizenship requirement. So students do need to be U.S. citizens or permanent residents eligible to apply for citizenship. There's also a Louisiana residency requirement. So for dependent students, the parent must be a resident of Louisiana and reside in Louisiana for 24 months prior to the high school graduation. So for our 2027 seniors, Louisiana residency must have been established by April 2025. And then the student cannot have any final criminal convictions. This is not misdemeanor traffic violation, so this is not a speeding ticket or anything like that. This is just anything that may result in a final criminal conviction, and we usually just to advise that you consult with your attorney if that kind of situation is pertinent for you. Now, for the home study specific merit-based requirement, that is going to come from a qualified score on a standardized test. So that can be the ACT, that can be the SAT, or it can be the CLT, which is the newest kid on the block. Previously, those qualifying scores for home study students were higher to account for the fact that the students do not have to earn a qualifying GPA on the TOPS core curriculum. but Act 359 of the 2025 legislation lowered that score, so now the required score levels for home study students actually mirror what's required of the students who are attending those BESI-approved public and non-public school. So it's the same across the board. And there's often a misconception that students, for home study students, they have to follow or complete the TOPS core curriculum like the students in brick and mortar schools do. You don't. That's not a requirement. And the reason for that is that LDOE for home study does not dictate a curriculum or resources that you have to follow. When you're home study, you get to choose those. So as a result, they can't necessarily legislate that the core curriculum is being completed, so therefore that component is not a requirement for home study students. That also means that LOFSA does not need final transcripts for home study students after graduation. So that's one less thing you have to do on your to-do list after graduation. Any questions about that?
What was this test names again?
The ACT,
Okay.
SAT, or CLT, and we'll actually look at each one of those in the next couple of slides. Absolutely. So actually starting with this, this guide has the same information here, so just kind of as helpful, page 5 kind of also has this information. So starting with the ACT, because Louisiana is an ACT prevalent state, that's usually the most readily available test for students to take. We'll start with ACT. With ACT, we're looking for the highest composite score on a single test. That does not consider the essay portion in the composite. The composite is actually created from, it's considered an EMR score, which is the English, the math, and the reading. Science is optional, so science is actually not a part of the composite score. And so with the composite score, that is different from a super score. And that can be confusing because in the ACT portal, I believe they call it SuperScore Composite or Composite SuperScore. And that can be misleading. With a SuperScore, what ACT is doing is they're taking the highest subsection of from the student from any test and putting them together for the highest possible total. That's the SuperScore. That can be used by certain universities for scholarship purposes, so that's why that exists. That is relatively new. ACT rolled that out a few years ago. For TOPS purposes, we are limited to using a composite, which means that every subsection has to have the same test date, and we're not doing it to be mean. Unfortunately, the TOPS statute, the way that the TOPS statute is written, it is requiring an ACT composite score. So we're kind of limited. SuperScore didn't exist at that point in time, so we're kind of tied to that. Legislation would have to change that for us to be able to accept SuperScore. So we're looking for composite. So the best way to tell if is this composite, can I use this for TOPS? Look at the subsections. If all of the subsections have the same test date, we can use that for TOPS. TOPS does have a registration code for ACT, so when the student is registering for a test, they get to the section where they can list all of the schools and the organizations that they would like to receive the test score. 1595 is the TOPS code. Now, I know we have some parents of seniors and juniors, so we may have already taken ACT. Before you panic thinking, I didn't know this code existed, what do I do? LOFSA has an agreement with ACT to where they send us the scores of all students who test in Louisiana. This is sort of just a safety net to make sure that we get those scores. And also it's helpful to use the 1595 code. If student is testing in the summer, sometimes those scores come to us a few weeks later. The lag time between the score release and the download into our system can be a little slower, but that 1595 code kind of expedites those scores. But again, it's not a total deal breaker. And then also before you panic and pay $18 or $19 for ACT to send us scores, always contact us because I can check our incoming files. There's a 95-96% chance that we have those scores, and I can manually merge those in for the student and save you some money. When the student actually goes to take the ACT test, if they are reporting to a high school to test, the high school may have their code on the board when they are registering to begin the test. If they use that, that's totally fine, but there is a homeschool code for ACT. It's 969999. If they use that code, that score comes to LOFSA's award system with a flag that indicates that it's a home study student, and that just sort of allows me to know, okay, this student is home study, so I'm going to be looking for X, Y, and Z, because otherwise we have no real way of kind of knowing as the home study kids are coming to us, because we're not getting transcript data or lists from the Department of Ed or anything like that. So this is kind of a little way for me to get to know, okay, who are my kiddos who are graduating?
I've already taken it twice, and we didn't have any of that.
I can always check our systems, no worries. Yeah, absolutely. So again, we have that code, but if they use the code that they test at for the high school, that's also really, that's okay. That's not going to change anything or affect anything in a negative way. Now for our class of 2027, some deadlines to keep in mind, and the deadlines are on page 5. Page 5. So the deadline to earn a qualifying ACT score with no penalty is going to be the national April test date. So even if you don't have a senior, just know it's always going to be that national April test date. So for our 2027 grads, that is going to be April 17th, 2027. Now I say no penalty. Let's say a student doesn't quite have their score yet, and we're at that deadline. If the student wants to do a late score, they can. That can be the June 12th, or for our 2027 grads, or the July 10th. Now I say that that's a late score. So if we use a late score to process for TOPS, that does come with a semester penalty that comes off of the back end of the award. So typically Opportunity, Performance, Honors, and Excellence awards are 8 semester awards. So if we have to use a late score, it's going to be 7 semesters instead of the 8, but the penalty comes off the back end of the award. So the award is going to be eligible for use beginning right away. It's just going to be that last final semester where the funding is not going to be available. Now, I do caution by saying if your student already has a qualifying score but they're trying to move up in levels, that may be a conversation worth having and crunching the numbers, because if we have to use the highest score. So if a student tests late and let's say they have already been awarded the Opportunity Award, they're at a 20, and they test in the summer and they get a 23, that would move them up to the Performance. Y'all, the difference between Opportunity and Performance is a $200 stipend per semester versus 1 full semester loss of award eligibility. So it just may not be a matter of practicality for your individual student. However, if you have a student who is planning to get a bachelor's degree and they're at a 19 and they need to be at a 20, because 19 would be TOPS Tech, which is a 2-year award that they couldn't use for a bachelor's, but the 20 is the Opportunity Award that can be used. They could test in June or July. They could use that late score, and that would be 7 semesters of eligibility versus none before. Does that make sense? So in some cases, for some students, it should be absolutely, yeah, go for it. And then some, it just may not be fiscally the best choice. Any questions about that? Okay. Now, TOPS is based on high school performance, so of course there is a final deadline. So any student who has not earned a qualifying score before August 1st of their graduating year is not going to be eligible for a TOPS award. So every once in a while we get a student who asks, well, can I continue testing in college and then apply for it later? Unfortunately not. It's based on that high school performance, so they do have that deadline. So something to keep in mind. And I mentioned this earlier, the science part is now optional, so whether a student takes it or not is not going to affect their composite score. It's just a matter of if the student chooses to take the science part or not. I will advise that if a student is going into a STEM field, they may want to take that science part so they have that score for placement purposes. That may be something to consider. So that was the ACT. So now SAT. So students can qualify with an equivalent SAT score. Just like with the ACT score, we're not looking at the essay portion is not part of the composite score. SAT TOPS registration code is 9019, but just like with ACT, we have an agreement with SAT, so if the student has already tested and you didn't know this code, we should be able to find that score in our incoming files. And then the homeschool high school code for SAT is 970000, but again, if they use the school that they test at, that's okay too. So for our 2027 grads, the deadline with no penalty is going to be the March 6th, 2027 test date. The late tests can be the May 1st or the June 5th. Any questions about SAT?
What was the test date on that one?
So without any penalty is going to be, it's usually March 6th, yeah, for seniors. So if you don't have a senior, it's going to be the March test date. But March 6th for our 2027 grads. Now the late ones are going to be May 1st or June 5th. No, okay. Perfect. I was going to say always that's the caveat, but yeah. All right. And then our newest kid on the block, the Classic Learning Test, or CLT. Starting with the class of 2025, CLT scores can be used to qualify for TOPS. Now I do say this, have the conversation with the college, because not every college accepts CLT scores for admission purposes. So you may want to have that conversation. Many of them will. I think apparently in the first session there's some conversations that were had at schools where they were like, okay, you took that, that's fine. But have that conversation just so you know. But for TOPS purposes, I forget I have a microphone. For TOPS purposes, we can use CLT scores to process for TOPS. And then the other piece that we'll need specifically for home study students is going to be home study documentation. So we only need documentation for 9th through 12th grades. So what essentially that's going to be is that's going to be the BESI approval notifications for 11th and 12th, or 11th grade if applicable, and 12th, and then documentation for 9th and 10th, and it's going to depend on how the student completed those grades, and we'll talk about the different options. But basically what'll happen is if students apply for TOPS their senior year by completing the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, there is a question on the FAFSA that asks about high school completion status. The first answer says high school diploma, which most students choose. There's a third option down there that says home study, but most of the students read that first option, check it, and move forward. And that's okay. But if a student marks that homeschool or home study, what'll happen is when that FAFSA data loads in our system, it flags the student as home study and allows me to, oh, okay, this is one of my kiddos I need to be on the lookout for, and that's where I can start trying to pull information. So what our office does is for the students who have indicated homeschool or home study on the FAFSA, we send those students' names over to Department of Ed, and then they start working on verifying what they have as far as the approval notifications. That can sometimes be a lengthy and inconsistent process. So if you talk to me directly, I will often ask for them, just because sometimes it's faster for me to get those to our processors than waiting on the verification, kind of talking from one agency to another. So that's kind of where that difference can happen. So for 11th, if applicable, and 12th, the BESI approval notifications. And then for 9th and 10th is going to depend on how the student completed. So if you do BESI approved home study for 9th and 10th, that's fine, you'll have those approval notifications. If you guys register as non-public, not seeking state approval, you'll have the attendance registration confirmation letter that's sent to you. You can send those for 9th and 10th. Now, if the student was enrolled in public or private school, that school can actually write a certification letter. They'll give it on school letterhead. That'll confirm the dates and years and whether the student was in good standing at the time that they withdrew and transitioned to homeschool.
I have a question about that.
Yes, ma'am.
What if they click that first box on?
Yeah.
Do they still need to send it, or?
Oh, yeah.
Is it complicated?
No. So there's no difference in value between choosing the high school diploma or the home study, so please know that. Okay. That was just kind of an early alert for us. So what'll happen is I may not know that the student is homeschool until I hear from you, or you send in stuff or something else, or I see that if maybe the code was used on ACT and I go, oh, I can look further. That's basically, because most of the time it's self-reporting. It's when the parents reach out or the students.
Have to send that regardless of. which one? So they click
Pretty
the
much,
last one.
yeah. Out of an
Yes,
abundance
so-
of caution, I usually ask for everything just so that I have clear documentation for the student, and just in case, I like to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted just to make sure that everything is needed for students. So yeah, absolutely. And then, so school has the letter. I talked about all of those things. And if you can't put hands on the documentation for 9th and 10th, don't panic, because you can always write a home study administrator letter, and I can provide guidance on kind of what that letter needs to say. Essentially, it would be similar to what a brick and mortar public or non-public school would write as far as confirming the grade levels, the years, and whether they were in good standing when they transitioned to a BESI approved home study program. So that's easy enough. I usually say as long as we have the 11th and 12th grade pieces there, we can usually put the rest of the pieces in the puzzle together, no problem. And then just kind of as a reference, on the left, that's the attendance submission. That's when you apply non-public, not seeking state approval. This is what we're talking about when we say the state sends. So if you have those for 9th and 10th, that can be sent in. If you can't put hands on those, don't worry, we can always pivot to a home study administrator letter. But 11th, if applicable, and 12th, that's what we're looking for on the right. So that's that BESI approval notification. Any questions about documentation? Because we'll pivot on to the different actual award levels. So we're going to take time to kind of talk about what each one of these is, how to earn it, and what it actually pays for, focusing on that new Excellence Award, which is only in its second year. So we'll start with opportunity, and this, if you're following along, this will be on page 2 that kind of has the breakdown of the different levels. So we're going to flip between 2 and 3 and 4. So the requirements are on 2, and then 3 and 4 kind of has a breakdown of what to expect. So starting with that Opportunity Award, that is an ACT of 20, or SAT of 1030, or CLT score of 66. I said or because sometimes students look at that and say, I have to take all 3 of those tests. Nope, you just need a qualifying score on one of those. So those are kind of the options to get to be able to qualify. And then of course the general eligibility requirements that we talked about at the beginning. So that Opportunity Award, that is going to provide a tuition portion award at a public or a private Louisiana institution. Now that tuition portion award is going to be applied towards tuition costs on a student's billing statement. However, they can use TOPS with other forms of financial aid all the way up to the cost of attendance at a school. So it can be used, they can stack that with other forms of financial aid. And so the TOPS Opportunity Award, that can be used towards a bachelor's degree, it can be used towards an associate's degree, academic undergraduate degree, vocational or technical certificate, or a non-academic degree. So students can absolutely use this as a technical award if they'd like to. It can also be used at eligible Louisiana cosmetology and proprietary schools as well. It is a maximum of 8 semesters or 12 quarters at Louisiana Tech. It's generally not available for summer unless the student is enrolled in a qualified summer session, and usually that requires some hours under their belt, so it's usually not freshman status, probably moving into later sophomore, junior, and then there's some paperwork, and they have to be approved with their university. But that said, a student can take a summer class on their own, pay out of pocket. That is not going to affect their terms of eligibility. So if they wanted to do that, that's absolutely fine. Just as a general rule, the TOPS awards are not going to be used automatically or applied automatically for summer sessions. Now, if a student has taken advantage of dual enrollment, or they have some CLEP courses and they're coming with some credit under their belt, they may graduate before they've used those 8 semesters or their 12 quarters. If they do, they can use the remaining semesters of eligibility towards a graduate program. And they can take up to a year in between graduating and then enrolling in that graduate program. So those semesters of eligibility aren't lost, they can use them down the road. And then if they're one of the higher award levels and we're receiving a stipend, they would continue to receive that stipend if they're using it for their graduate program. So moving up from Opportunity is the Performance Award. So that's ACT of 23, or SAT of 1130, or CLT of 80. And then that one's a little bit higher because it's going to pay a little bit more. So this is going to be the same tuition portion award plus an extra $400 a year. So typically that's going to be $200 per semester on top of the tuition portion award. And then moving up from that is the Honors Award, so that's ACT of 27, SAT of 1260, or CLT of 91. And that's going to be that same tuition portion plus an extra $800 a year, or $400 per semester on top of that tuition portion award. And then our new one, so the TOPS Excellence a little different because it's not a stipend type situation. So this one is ACT of 31, or SAT of 1390, or CLT of 101. And so this one, instead of having a tuition portion and a stipend, for students who are at public institutions, it's going to be an amount that is, it's going to be the annual amount equal to tuition and fees, or $12,000, whichever is less. And so that's the $12,000 over the year, so that's broken into fall and spring semester. If a student is attending one of the private institutions, one of the LaQ institutions, that is going to be tuition and fees, or $8,500, whichever is less. So that's going to be that Excellence Award. It's more like a lump sum than like a tuition portion and a stipend.
How do you tell what the tuition portion is?
So on our website, we have, on page 4, there is a QR code that says TOPS OPHE. Okay. And there are award amounts by institution. There is specifically one just for the excellence levels at every university. So they have the cost of tuition. So that way you can see, for example, I'll say that LSU was the one we used in the first one. Their tuition and fees is more than that $6,000. So excellence at LSU is $6,000. So it's whichever is less. But that QR code will take you to the document that'll have it for every university. So that way you kind of know. And then we also have the TOPS Tech Award. That one is ACT score of 17, SAT of 920, or CLT score of 54, or Work Keys Silver level score or higher. Now the ACT Work Keys can be taken, home study students can access that test at community schools or technical schools. They will give those to students. It's a little bit different than the regular ACT. But if they have silver level or higher, they can use that to qualify for a TOPS Tech Award. And so that one's going to be different from the others that we just talked about. It is a 2-year award, and it's designed for use towards an associate's degree or another shorter term credential. It can also be used with the universal pathways, transfer pathways through the Board of Regents. So let's say that a student's ultimate goal is to have a bachelor's degree, but based on scores, they were awarded TOPS Tech. Well, if their long-term goal is to get that bachelor's, with the universal transfer pathways, it's a set of agreements between certain community colleges and 4-year universities across the state where the student can begin working at a community college towards an associate's and use their TOPS Tech Award for those first 60 credits. And then there's an agreement. If they have an agreement with a 4-year university, the university is going to accept all 60 of those credits for them to continue on to their bachelor's. So at least they were able to use their TOPS Tech for the 2 years to get started and then continue the second half of their degree. So for TOPS Tech is a little bit different than for summer sessions. If a student is enrolled in a technical program with their TOPS Tech and the school offers a summer term and they want to do it, their TOPS Tech will cover that. That's not going to detract from the 2 years. So it can be an addition if they'd like to. Participation's not mandatory, but it is available. Questions about the different award levels? Yeah? Okay.
I have one.
Yes?
So you said that for the TOPS honors, because I'm just trying to determine whether or not my son wants to, he's obsessed with testing on every level. And we kept taking every level. He's like, oh, no, I need one more point. And so he needs one more point for TOPS excellence. And I'm like, I don't want to see that test anymore. But I'm trying to determine, because you said like with LSU, maybe 6,000, is that 6,000 for their semester for them? Because I was wondering, like, it may be better for him to just do some state TOPS honors.
Yeah.
And then get the stipend. Is the stipend, like, can it be for materials and fees?
It can be. So with the honors stipend, it would be about 40. So the regular TOPS opportunity tuition portion is like 3740 something. And then with the honors, the extra 400 would be about 41. Now, some of the stipend amount can be put towards the other costs outside of tuition. But then if he's excellence, that's 6,000 versus the 41. So that is
Okay,
a
so
pretty
that'd be a
big
big
jump.
jump,
And then
yeah.
keep in mind any other financial aid he has can also be applied towards that
And
as
is
well.
that one, like, this is towards tuition and fees as well, like the.
Yes, yes. So the excellence award is going to be the total of tuition and fees, or that 6,000. So that 6,000 can be put towards both of those different amounts on the billing statement.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So TOPS is a Louisiana-based scholarship, which means that it is limited for use in Louisiana. TOPS cannot be used outside of Louisiana, with the exception of students who are attending universities that are primarily for hard of hearing students. And currently there are only two that are acceptable: Gallaudet University and Rochester Institute of Technology. You will occasionally hear students say, "Oh, well, I went to Mississippi and I got to use my TOPS." What will happen is our neighboring states like to match the scholarships, and they'll say, "Oh, you can use your TOPS with us," but what they're actually doing is they're offering an equivalent scholarship. So just know that that's usually just an effort to poach students. But then I also like to tell our students who are planning to go out of state, use it as a leveraging tool. Let the out-of-state college know, well, hey, if I stay in state, I'd be offered this. Is there anything you can do? It can't hurt to ask. So just kind of food for thought. But unfortunately, the TOPS can't be used out of state. But it can be used at plenty of places in state. So starting with our public universities, that's going to be all of our campuses that make up the Louisiana State University system, including, I got to get used to saying this, Louisiana State University New Orleans, formerly UNO, which as of July has moved back to the Louisiana State University. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue like you. I'm going to practice and get better at that. But it also includes the LSU Health Sciences campuses, the one in New Orleans as well as the one in Shreveport. And then all of your Southern University System campuses, and then all of the campuses that make up the University of Louisiana system. And then everybody else sounds like they're having a really great time. I'm so sorry that I've got to deliver all the heavy stuff. And then all of our campuses across the state that make up the Louisiana Community and Technical College system. So they're all a part of that as well. And then also not forgetting about our private institutions. Those are the campuses that make up the LaQ organization. So they're listed there. So TOPS can be used there. So it's limited to Louisiana, but you have quite a lot of options to choose from. So just a little bit to know about kind of how the application process works, what you need to do. Really, applying for TOPS is going to happen in the senior year. So students are going to apply their senior year. They can apply in two different ways. Students can complete the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, or we just have the TOPS online application available on our website that is just going to be the application for TOPS. We typically encourage everyone to complete the FAFSA application just because it's a free application. It is the application for all federal aid, some state-based aid, and then it also counts as the application for TOPS. Also, a lot of colleges require students to have FAFSAs on file for them to be eligible for certain campus-based programs. So it may be a good idea to have that conversation with the college of, hey, do we need a FAFSA on file to be eligible for, whatever programs you may have, because it may save you only having to do the FAFSA from the jump. Now, if families do not want to complete the FAFSA, that's totally fine. We have just the TOPS online application on our website, but that is specifically for TOPS. There's no other eligibility determined. It's just going to be that TOPS eligibility. You don't have to do both, one or the other. And if you've already completed a FAFSA and you go to complete the TOPS online application, it actually won't let you because we'll already have that data in our system. So basically, students are going to apply. Once we get that application data in our system, it should merge with any score data, so ACT, SAT, or CLT that we should have for the student, and at that point, a student's profile is going to be generated in our award system, and that's where we can start making sure, okay, do we have everything that we need? Do we have the scores? Do we have the application? Do we have the home study documentation? So that's when the student has a profile in our award system. Again, we get that ACT data from those scores, but also if we're missing any scores, we should be able to check our incoming files and manually merge anything that may have not loaded on its own. Now, I say not loaded on its own. We do encourage students to use their same information or fill out their information the same on everything so that it encourages matching. So if your student is Samuel, but they go by Sam, and they complete the FAFSA because its official paperwork is Samuel, but they register for ACT as Sam. Those scores that's not going to merge just because our system is very sensitive, and it's just making sure that the documentation, that it's the same person. But if I can verify that information, I can merge that for you, so don't panic about that. But that's just kind of what some of the things that can kind of hold up processing. And then once we have that, we have the home study application, all of that documentation added. Once we have everything, we actually set the students, especially for home study, we set them as home study verified, and then they are ready to go. As soon as I have that documentation and the student has a profile and they have application and they have a test score, a qualifying test score, they're ready to go. So a lot of my home study students are ready for processing January, February, March, well before we're ready. And actually, as a result, our home study kids are usually in the first batch processed. So we don't start processing until June. So we kind of let everybody get through graduation. We let those public and private schools finish their transcript data, and they have to send that transcript data to us. But because we're not waiting on that transcript data for home study students, we're ready to go, and we're usually the first round. We process on Monday nights and Thursday nights, so we usually have top statuses Tuesday morning and Friday morning. And then every Friday, we email student award letters to the student email address. So whatever email address the student used on application data, that's where the award letter is sent to. We don't send anything through the physical mail. The award letter is going to have the student's award status, and then also there's a section for rights and responsibilities. That's usually where they hand it to you and say, hey, you're the adult, your job. You get to have all the rules. But that rights and responsibilities section basically says everything the student needs to do to maintain the award. And what that basically is full-time continuous enrollment, earning 24 credit hours in an academic year, and keeping a minimum GPA. And renewal requirements are actually on which page?
8.
Page 8. So yeah, those different GPAs are listed there by award level. We had a question in the first group. If you do the FAFSA, do you have to apply the FAFSA every year for TOPS? Not for TOPS purposes. Once you're awarded TOPS, it's just the renewal requirements to keep it. But if a student was getting financial aid from the FAFSA, in order to keep receiving that financial aid, they do need to do a FAFSA every year. But let's say y'all do a FAFSA the first year, not eligible for anything, you don't have to keep doing it every year. You can, because it does use different tax information each year, so it may shift. Eligibility the student may be eligible for more things. And when I say federal financial aid, I'm talking about the Pell Grant. I'm talking about FSEOG grant, federal work study, so on-campus jobs. So completing that FAFSA application can open up quite a lot of opportunities for different sources of funding. So it's something to consider for that. And then usually any student, we just kind of let parents and students know, if you haven't heard from us by about mid-July about like a top status or an awards letter, reach out just in case so we can see if anything is missing, which you guys actually have your very own email address. So the tops.homestudy@la.gov. We have our regular CustServe email address. If you've ever communicated with LOFSA, you may have communicated with that email address. But home study specific, you have a short track straight, and that inbox actually just goes to me. So if you need anything, I can help, or if I need to check for scores, or if I need to check for processing, I can definitely help you out with that. Now, the award is emailed, but it's also going to be housed in something called the Student Hub account, which is different from their college account and different from their FAFSA, their FSAID account. The Student Hub account is on our website, and it basically allows them to keep track of their TOPS award. So their award letters and any notifications that we send to the student are going to be housed in the Communications tab. Once the school has submitted billing for TOPS awards, those payments are going to show up on their record, so that's a good way of making sure that their TOPS payments are showing up like they should. Each semester, their GPA is going to be there, so it's going to keep track of their college credits. And then once a student is 18 or enrolled full-time, FERPA prevents us from disclosing any information to anyone other than the student without consent. But if the student has a Hub account, you as a parent can actually go in and register to get an account as well, and the accounts merge, or well, not merge, but they're connected.
is the student hub, is it the same with the login for their 5 to 9?
No, that's going to be separate. Yeah. And so once a parent and a student have an account, the student can actually go into their account in a permissions tab and grant you consent. Because let's be real, they're going to start college, but you're not stopping parenting. So they're going to be in class, or they're going to be asleep, or they're not going to be handling business, and you may have to call. If you have that consent set up and you call me and I pull up the student account, it's going to say consent granted to, and we're good to go, which is easier than having to maybe wrangle them out of class on the phone and say, hey, can you grant verbal consent real quick? So it could be the potential to save you a headache down the road. So yes, I said the TOPS payments show up, and that's important because TOPS doesn't pay the student directly. The school is going to bill LOFSA for students who are enrolled full-time after the 15th class day of the semester or the 9th class day of the quarter at LA Tech. And so the school submits a payment request. We send the payment to the school, and then the school applies it to the student account. So before, that's going to be it's going to be a credit on the billing statement, but then once that payment goes through, it's going to show up in the student account. And that's really helpful for a student to make sure that those payments are showing up so that A, they're not purged in the middle of a semester because there's an outstanding balance, or they receive a shocking bill kind of in the middle of the semester and they're like, what is this about? So this is just kind of a way of keeping on top of things as far as their TOPS payments go. So once a student is processed, they're added to something called the TOPS master roster, and that's what every school uses to verify. So the student or the parent does not have to report to the school. The school is actually going to check that once the student is enrolled, and then if they have that verification, they can add the TOPS award to the student's billing statement as they're getting ready to begin the semester. And then again, those institutions are going to electronically bill LOFSA for those awards for students who are enrolled full-time. Now I say by the 15th class day of the semester or the 9th day of the quarter, those are considered the census dates, and that is what's going to determine full-time status. So if a student starts a semester and it looks early on like they need to drop a class, that may put them below full-time. Wait until after that 15th class day or that 9th class day to drop, because otherwise TOPS they wouldn't be able to bill for TOPS because the student wouldn't be full-time. So that's kind of a helpful thing, because then if they're less than full-time, that also affects the full-time enrollment status and can be another mess of paperwork to have to do. So that's helpful to kind of keep in mind.
If they do the summer, even if they're paying for it on their own, will that count towards those hours?
Yes.
Okay.
So let's say a student has to drop. So in theory, a student has to be enrolled full-time for fall and spring. Full-time for most programs is going to be 12 hours. So in a perfect world, 12 hours in the fall, 12 hours in the spring, you got your 24 credit hours, you're good. But life rarely works out that perfectly. So if a student has to drop a class in the fall, so instead of the 12, they earned 9, they can add a class in the spring to make up. Or if they want to take a summer class, those hours will count towards the 24. So basically the academic year is going to be the fall term, any winter intercessions, spring semester, any spring intercessions, and then summer. So they have that whole window to kind of earn those 24 credit hours. Yeah. Any questions on that? No? Okay. And so to accept the TOPS award, there's nothing to click, there's nothing to sign, there's nothing that you have to do other than the student needs to enroll full-time at an eligible institution no later than the fall semester following their 1-year anniversary of high school graduation. So that does mean that the student can take a gap year. So if they want to wait, if they do mission work, if they're doing an internship, they can absolutely do that. So for our 2027 seniors, their deadline to enroll full-time is going to be that fall 2028 semester. And some students like to go less than full-time, like they kind of want to just get started, and that's okay too. So as long as they're full-time by that deadline, so it's the fall semester following the 1-year anniversary of high school graduation. And then for TOPS eligible students who decide to enlist, or they join the armed forces on active duty within a year of high school graduation, their TOPS award will be waiting for them as long as they enroll in an eligible institution by the semester immediately following the 1-year anniversary from separation from active duty. Now the student does need to receive an honorable discharge or a general discharge under honorable conditions, and they do have to apply within a year of separation from active duty. And then on the other hand, if TOPS recipients choose to serve in the Louisiana National Guard, their award actually is going to work a little bit different. So instead of those tuition portion awards, they're actually going to get National Guard tuition exemption instead of that TOPS tuition amount. Plus, they're going to have a $300 per semester stipend for books and supplies. And then if they were one of those TOPS levels that had a stipend, their stipend is actually doubled. So for performance, they would get $400 per semester. Honors would get $800, and excellence didn't have a stipend, but if they're excellence and they're doing National Guard, they actually get an extra $1,000 on top of that as well. And then there's also the National Guard Patriot Scholarship that they may be eligible for. And what that'll do is, since they have the tuition exemption, but there's also fees on the billing statement, the National Guard Patriot Scholarship covers those mandatory fees that the student may incur. Questions about military with a TOPS perspective? No? All right, that was a ton of information thrown at you. That TOPS at Home Study at la.gov is on the back of your guide. And I also encourage, if you didn't, we do have the specific business card for Home Study that has my desk number as well as this email address. So that way, if down the road you're like, wait, what was she saying? Or you have questions, or you're not quite in senior year, grab one. Or if you have individual questions, we're here. We still have some time, so we're good. But thank y'all.
Thank you.